Welcome to Calorie, a podcast where science meets art. Calorie is a bundle of fibers that connects the left half of the brain with the right. According to conventional neuroscience, the left half of the brain is more logical and mathematical, and the right half is more artistic and creative. Although modern literature challenges this concept, the reason I named it Calorie is because the theme of this podcast is interdisciplinary thinking. I strongly believe that the future lies in taking a fundamental concept from one field and applying it to another, leading to new ideas that transcend the confines of a single discipline. My name is Dr. Sunit Zadav. I'm an assistant professor in anatomy and a musician who's currently pursuing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, trying to understand how music affects the brain. While reading the latest research on this topic, I was fascinated by how much we do not know yet. And the podcast is my idea of trying to deliver whatever I read to an audience that is excited to learn more about the human brain and body, but in simpler words, so they feel enabled to live a healthier life. Lastly, being part of an independent music community, I would further love to use this podcast to help indie artists perform their upcoming art, in the hope that it reaches a wider audience.
We're going to move ahead with the next question, which is even more interesting, which is, what is this entire confusion between animal protein versus plant protein? This is a big one.
The thing is that there is a lot of research which has gone into animal protein versus plant protein, starting from 1995 when studies have come out with which compare animal and plant protein. The main issue in this topic is that plant protein is not really a thing which has existed so far. Up until recent, we've not really had plant protein powders. I mean, we've not really had the ability to access a large quantity of plant protein. If you wanted to get plant protein, you would have to eat a lot of food which contained the plant protein. And you don't really have access to plant protein powders until a couple of years ago. So those are things which have come up recently. And till this point of time, we have not really had a great amount of data which has compared specifically plant protein and animal protein as such. But over the last couple of years, a lot of studies have come out. And honestly speaking, and little surprised about it myself, plant protein has been shown to have significant health benefits as compared to animal protein. Now, the studies that I went through, there are important randomized trials which have been done where people have been given plant protein and animal protein. And what they found is that, for example, in one study, a certain group of people were already taking about 14% of their calorie intake as animal protein, while they were only getting about 4% of the calorie intake from plant protein. And what was found that on increasing the amount of animal intake from 10% of calorie intake to 18% of calorie intake, they actually found that there was a higher risk of death from cardiovascular diseases. But on the other hand, increasing plant protein led to a lower risk of overall death, of cardiovascular death, and death from even other causes also. What is a little bit more scary is that just changing 3% of your energy intake from animal protein to plant protein significantly reduced the risk of death. And that applied particularly to processed red meat, and we have always known that processed red meat is bad for you. But apart from that, it applied to almost every other type of protein also. Now, the hazard ratio for the other types of protein were a little bit less concerning than it was for processed red meat. For processed red meat, it was somewhere around 0.7. So, which means that if you switch 3% of your energy intake from processed red meat to plant protein, the risk of you dying overall decreases by almost 30%, which is a large amount. But that is processed red meat, so we know that's bad for you. But when it comes to other proteins also, including dairy as well as poultry, as well as non-processed red meat, those numbers are also still significant, but they are in a bit of a higher range of 0.9 to 0.96 and 0.97, which means if you switch from these proteins to a plant protein based diet, your risk comes down to only about 5 to 10% as compared to switching from processed red meat. But studies are right now definitely showing that a higher intake of plant protein definitely improves your overall risk, specifically with relation to overall death as well as cardiovascular death. Now, the thing to remember about plant protein is that plant protein is not as easily absorbed and digested as animal protein is. It takes a little bit more time to digest plant protein. It's not completely absorbed. So there's a value that is important with plant protein is known as the NPA, that is a net protein absorption. So that is lower with plant protein as compared to animal protein. And the other thing is plant protein is not complete. There are that between different types of plant protein and different types of plant protein sources, different amino acids are missing. So you have to do a little bit of a mix and match to try to get the whole source of amino acids in. So there's already a lot of data and discussion available online on how to do that. But now that we have plant protein powders, which have all these amino acids, we have to see where we go with that, because data has to come out on that, like how are these plant protein powders doing. So studies have been done with these plant protein powders, and it has been found that the amount of muscle that you put on plant versus animal protein powders is basically the same. Right? So with both animal and plant protein, you can put on muscle. The only point of concern that somebody might have is the taste. So from what I know, the taste is not the best. But honestly, if it's a choice between plant protein and unflavored whey protein, it's like, okay. So you have to maybe let go of your taste buds at some point of time.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So another thing about taste is, I think I remember teaching in histology that your taste buds kind of start forming new taste buds. So they have like a half-life of about approximately 180 days. Don't cite me because I could be wrong. But in about 6 months, if you could continue tasting whatever it is that you want to taste, eventually there are new taste buds that have completely replaced the older ones, and you might just kind of get used to this new taste, and eventually it becomes a part of your life. So yeah, and I think there's a certain amount of beauty in practicing restraint. One must not always eat for taste. I think it's an important quality to have, to just understand that sometimes you got to eat something that might not taste good but might be great for your body, right? And I think that would also be a deeper insight into the entire psychological approach towards food, all the dopamine hits that tasty foods give you. Just trying to use average or not so good tasting food as a means to kind of suppress that dopamine release until maybe the weekend, or until you achieve something good and you want to like really party and have that one thing that you're craving for. It's such a good practice to kind of hold yourself back, I think that's one thing that is kind of lacking, in the current generation. And I don't mean to sound like I'm an old man, but I do realize that when I was in medical school, there was no Zomato. I did not have 1,000 food options popping on my screen. And especially if I was stressed, as most of my students are, especially pre-exam, it's just kind of a bit of a mess in your brain. So you're kind of looking out for these weird releases and looking at these beautiful shiny photos of an ice cream, a brownie, or whatever, or a burger might just kind of, make you want to push that order button and end up consuming it. And a nice way to deal with that would be practicing delayed gratification, like something like, I will treat myself with my favorite ice cream once I finish chapter number so and so within this much amount of time. And this kind of achieves two things. The first thing is, when you're anticipating a reward, you actually release more dopamine. And dopamine is a great hormone for learning. It's not just an adventure-seeking hormone. So if you could tie a reward at the end of a goal, you could use all of that dopamine to strive you towards performing better and maybe even faster and more efficiently, and then get that dopamine kick from the food that you eat. So it's an interesting thing about taste, So I'm so glad you mentioned that. There have been experiments on apes as well, where they were given something that they found very tasty, and they put electrodes in the brains of the ape. And every time when the ape was anticipating that tasty food, when it was kept in front of him, but he did not have access to that food, there was more dopamine. And the moment the food was given, the dopamine would suddenly, rush down. And eventually they reached a stage where no matter how much tasty food you gave to the monkey, the dopamine was not hitting at all, which kind of explains the entire psychological circuitry of what might be wrong with the whole obesity epidemic. So that was interesting, the whole taste thing. Another thing that I really want to discuss with you, since we're speaking about delayed gratification, is just abstinence from food or fasting. What are your views about fasting, especially intermittent fasting? That's the hip thing these days.
I'm just going to tell you a very, very important basic fact that I am hoping a lot of people know, and they probably do. The lower amount of calories you consume throughout your lifetime, the longer you're going to live. Okay, so that is proven. The more you eat, the shorter you live. So fasting basically takes that like to as extreme as you can go. The thing with fasting is that there are multiple different ways to do it. You can simply just do a calorie restriction where you eat lesser than your total maintenance calories. You can do intermittent fasting with all the different protocols that you have. With alternate day fasting, you can do a 5:2 protocol. You can do time restricted eating where you only eat in a short window of maybe 6 to 8 hours in a day, or what people do during Ramzan, etc., etc. So all of these have been evaluated in so many clinical trials, because like people are obsessed with the concept of fasting and what it can do for you. The basic idea still remains the same. The lesser you eat, the longer you live. You do it in whatever sense you want to. You want to do it by calorie restriction. You want to do it by fasting every alternate day. You want to eat only 6 hours or 8 hours a day. You are going to live longer. Okay, you're going to have lesser metabolic disorders. The thing is, particularly with intermittent fasting, what has been found is that it is easier to adhere to a protocol of intermittent fasting than it is to calorie restriction. So if you just try to reduce the amount of calories you eat in a day to like 500 below maintenance, you're going to find it a little bit more difficult to do that than to try and follow intermittent fasting. So that has been demonstrated. Okay, so people find it easier to stick to intermittent fasting, and that is why the results are better with intermittent fasting, just because it is easier to stick to. If you were able to stick to calorie restriction, just like eating a little bit lesser every day than what you're supposed to, that also will have the same amount of effect. Intermittent fasting, particularly as compared to calorie restriction, has not been shown to have any larger size effect on these benefits. So just if you feel like you are able to get in and just decrease calories, that also works well for you. If not, if you think that you're going to have adherence problems, you're not going to be able to stick to your diet plans, then intermittent fasting is good because it'll be easier to adhere to. What is important to remember is that any sort of fasting, any sort of calorie restriction is only for people who are trying to lose weight. You cannot use intermittent fasting if you're not trying to lose weight. Right? So if you're trying to maintain weight, you're trying to put on weight, intermittent fasting cannot be used at that point of time. You cannot do intermittent fasting to put on muscle. That will not work. Okay, that is just like, it is not physically possible. Intermittent fasting can be used, for example, when you're trying to cut. So that is possible. It will help you lose fat. If you continue doing resistance exercise during that time and you consume a slightly higher level of protein at around 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kg per day during intermittent fasting, you can maintain the muscle that you have put on and still intermittently fast. But again, you cannot use it at a time trying to put on muscle.
Wow, that was really insightful, because I have been one of the victims of the intermittent fasting fad way back in 2018 and 2019, but I lost so much muscle, and I just realized I don't like eating so much, because of which even when I ate, that's the thing, right? If you're fasting and you're having lesser meals in a day, then every meal deserves even more importance, even more attention. So then what a lot of my artist friends also ended up doing was like fasting, and then they're like, oh, I don't feel hungry as much. I was just eating unnecessarily. But then when they're eating their meals, they're just having random stuff, biscuits and gym jams and all of that. And then in the long term, I think it might have started affecting their immunity, because of which they stopped doing it. And I specifically speak about my musician friends in this context, because what happens with them is when they're out touring, it's just so difficult to make choices for them. So it's a little difficult for them to continue eating 3 to 4 meals a day, and they end up fasting. And then most of these gigs sometimes, I mean, not most, I don't want to generalize here, but a lot of these gigs end up in the binge uh, eating kind of a thing, once it's over. So that's another concern that I really had with intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is not magic. It doesn't just work like magic. It's easier for some people to be sustaining with this kind of a diet, and then they should. And that really comes with an added responsibility of making sure you really mindfully get your macros and your micros when you're doing your intermittent fasting. Because all these bloggers, these so-called professional intermittent fasters on Instagram and on YouTube, they start their day with some bone broth, and then they'll have some fruit, some seasonal fruit, then they're having avocado on toast. None of that stuff we do here. We are having Jim Jam biscuits or crackjack with chai. That's how people are breaking their fast over here. So that's not definitely enabling you to get those micronutrients. So if you're doing intermittent fasting, it does have a completely different plan that you need to do. It's not just being careless and just skipping a meal. There's a difference between skipping a meal and intermittent fasting. And one of my favorite scientists and physicians, Dr. Peter Attia, he beautifully classifies intermittent fasting into time restriction, calorie restriction, and macro restriction, right? So time restriction is clearly the 16/8, or some people just eat on alternate days. Calorie restriction is simply, as Dr. Chirag said, just, maybe reducing the amount of stuff in your plate, and macro restriction is just reducing the carbs in your plate. If you're trying to lose a little bit of fat, maybe upping your protein at the expense of lowering your carb, which is exactly what I need to do, Dr. Chirag, by the way, because I'm trying to lose now. I'm going to start getting a little more leaner. And I'm a little worried that all the hard work that I've put into gaining the strength and the muscle that I have over the last 6 months will again shrink, because a lot of the times I kind of end up losing probably intramuscular glycogen as well when I start doing fasting. Maybe the muscles start using the intramuscular glycogen and intramuscular lipids in the workouts, and then the rounded contour of my deltoids is not round anymore, which makes me feel that I'm emaciated in some sort. So I will try to, as per your recommendation, get my protein up to 1.6 to 1.8 grams per day if I do practice intermittent fasting. For me, it's more about the cognitive benefits as well. I did read some research about cognitive benefits, but again, that research was more on people who had some kind of a neurological problem, especially people with Alzheimer's, seem to show a very, very mild effect size as compared to normal people when put on intermittent fasting. And for the listeners who are not from a science background, an effect size is a more practical application of a research output. Because if you want to get your research published, usually you have something called a p-value, which I don't want to get into the detail of. But when you choose a p-value, usually it's 0.05. You're basically trying to say that there's only a 0.05% chance that whatever we found in this experimental design happened by chance, But effect size is how much is this really applicable to big populations, because as you know, when you do experiments, you can't sample an entire population. So you take a very limited part of the population and do some things and draw inferences from what you find in that little small sample by applying it to a larger population. And trust me, there are beautiful mathematical ways of doing that just to get stuff published by just tweaking a few things around. That's called p-hacking, and that's for another episode. But just remember, always trust effect sizes over p-values. That's just a word of advice for all the medical students also who are doing their review of literature, trying to design new experiments. So moving on to the next question, Dr. Chirag, if you go for what is known as the third type of fasting, which is macro restriction, and if you selectively try to cut out carbs and in an attempt to not go completely hypocaloric, slightly increase your fat, which means I don't want to call it keto. I don't want to use the K word. The K word garners a lot of hate. But if you just say, let's call it VLC, very low carbohydrate diet. Suppose I'm doing 50 to 60 grams, so I'm not in nutritional ketosis. But if I'm kind of trying to make up for the reduction in carbs by just increasing calorie dense foods, which are healthy oils, like, MCT oil, or say olive oil, I'm just sprinkling a little more of that in my salads. Or maybe if I'm doing some veggies, I'm roasting them in ghee. All these little things. What is your viewpoint about going on high fat, low carb diets? Let's not call it keto, but just your basic perspective on this.
So, weirdly enough, especially since we are Indians and we are so obsessed with carbohydrates in our food, carbohydrates are the only macronutrients which are not essential. We need protein, we need fat, but we do not need carbohydrates. And that's where the whole idea of keto diets, even though we are not using the K word, has come from. Now, the thing is that your body, right from the beginning, is used to using carbohydrates for fuel, for all sort of physical activity, for sports, for exercise, for just routine normal activity that you engage in. It's using carbohydrate for fuel. Now you can change that. It is possible to completely switch that from using carbs for fuel to fats. That takes time. Couple of months of just eating fats, your body will switch from using carbs to fats for fuel. The thing is that until that happens, you're going to struggle because your body is so used to eating carbs and so dependent on carbs for energy that it is not going to be able to utilize fat to generate that energy. It is going to need to convert the fat back to carbohydrates and then it can use it, but it cannot directly use fats for energy. So we have to wait for that switch to happen. So it takes some time. But it is found that people who switch to a completely fat-based diet can achieve the same level of exercise performance as somebody who relies on a carb-based diet. So that is possible. But it takes time, and obviously being on a completely fat-based diet is also not easy. Right? Especially in India, in a place where your entire diet is just based on carbs and a very small amount of fat and protein in there somewhere or the other. Are there any health benefits to switching to a completely fat-based diet? Well, keto diets have been shown again. I don't know. The thing is, ultimately, you really have to figure out as to how much you want to trust these studies and what is the significance, what is the effect size, like what difference and impact do they actually create, and how much of it is actually related to each other. Because in a randomized control trial, yes, you evaluate for all other variables, but at the end of the day, how much of an effect is it making to your life is something you need to figure out. But the important thing is just to see if something is good for you or bad for you. Now with keto diets, it is shown that your obesity and lipid profiles and glycemic control improves. Yes, so it does improve. Okay, so that is there. So keto diets are also very famous in neurology because we use them for epilepsy, especially drug-resistant epilepsy. And even it's been used in Alzheimer's also. So it's been shown to improve cognition. So definitely feasible. It is possible to do a completely fat-based diet, drop carbohydrates completely, or go very low with them. Your body will get used to such lower amounts of carbohydrates. Till the point it does, you will struggle. Performance will drop. Right? But over time, you can make that switch and your body will adapt.
Wow, that's wonderfully said. It was very concise. And so I don't want to bore my listeners with a subject called biochemistry, which basically talks about what happens with the macro and the micronutrients when it enters the body. So when we talk about cellular levels, there is an organelle called the mitochondria, which, as everyone rightly knows, is identified as the powerhouse of the cell. And the glucose burning as well as the fat burning pathways actually occur inside the mitochondria. Glucose burning is just known as glycogenolysis, which is basically the breaking down of glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose, and fat burning is known as beta oxidation, where fatty acids are broken down into simpler, smaller molecules, which are basically your ketone bodies, which are excessively produced in nutritional ketosis kind of a diet. And the cool thing is, the mitochondria is responsible for operating both these pathways. Now, the glycolytic pathway is having a different set of enzymes, and the beta oxidation of fat burning pathways has got a different kind of enzyme system. So a couple of authors really say that if you could go on occasional bouts of nutritional ketosis or low carbohydrate diets, you're kind of enforcing your mitochondria to use enzymes that it has long forgotten to use. For example, if you're constantly eating every 3 hours with some kind of a glucose or carbohydrate meal, then you're constantly ending up burning sugar for fuel. Now, if you could somehow, with a lot of willpower and a lot of inconvenience, trust me, stay away from the glucose, then your body has no choice but to start burning the fat by the beta oxidation pathway. And thus, you've got this flexibility of two currency systems where whenever you're eating sugar, you can start burning sugar. And whenever you're eating fat, you can start burning fat. So some authors call this metabolic flexibility, which is a good thing. Apparently, it helps in adaptation, and especially bodybuilders go on extremely low carbohydrate diets just a few days before they're supposed to perform on stage. And in fact, eventually they also stop drinking water. Now, I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. Their goals are completely different than ours. So there's something to do with mitochondrial flexibility and the strategic use of low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets. Once again, I would not recommend that to people who are not into modeling or professional bodybuilding. I would, just like Dr. Chirag said, prefer people maybe going on occasional bouts of low carbohydrate and trying to up their fat sources by adding some ghee or some olive oil, healthy fats, of course, not just like a triple burger minus the bread. That's also, again, not an example of very healthy fat. So that is something that even I would recommend. And Dr. Chirag, when you said that ketogenic diets have helped refractory epilepsy, etc., those studies have been conducted on actual humans, yeah?
They have been conducted on actual humans. The data is a little bit inconclusive. Some have shown positive effects, some have shown no effects. So requires further study at this current point in time. But yeah, it is currently a possible treatment for patients who would have nothing else to treat their epilepsy.
Right. So unless you are an epilepsy patient, I wouldn't really want you to get obsessed about the ketogenic diet. Hey, if it works for you, good for you. Do remember that when you lose a lot of glucose, or when you're just basically eating a lot of fat, you tend to lose a lot of electrolytes as well. There are certain mechanisms in the kidney where for every few grams of glucose, you also lose a few grams of sodium, and you're excreting a lot of glucose and sodium at the same time. So if you're on ketogenic diets, please talk to your doctor. Do your research, make sure that you get the electrolytes in, make sure you get the micronutrients in, and make sure that you basically, whenever you're eating, eat good quality fats. Now, this is not as easily available in India as it would be in Western countries. And, in the US of A or in Canada, you've got your avocado, you've got a lot of these salads with incredible dressings, good quality cheese, etc. Over here, since we are predominantly carb eaters, I would kind of tell you to just go low carb, not extremely keto. And the best way to do it is, I wanted to know your perspective on this, Dr. Chirag. What if we could just combine a little bit of intermittent fasting and a little bit of very low carb to our benefit? For example, when you end up fasting for about 14 hours, you're kind of glycogen depleted. Now, if you could just do a 14-hour fast instead of a 16-hour, which does not seem as difficult, and start your day with probably some egg and some salad instead of starting it with poha and upma, and then you could leave your carbs maybe later in the day after you've done a little bit of activity, etc. Wouldn't that be a nice little sweet spot to get where you're neither in keto, neither hardcore fasting, but still reaping the benefits of a little bit of both the worlds? What are your views on that?
I personally don't have any experience with something like this, and honestly, I don't know if it will work or it will not work. A thing that we tend to forget is that there's something called insulin.
Right.
Okay, and it really depends on your intake of carbs. Okay, so if you're trying to put on muscle, you're trying to get some growth in, so you're going to need that, especially when you're doing this intermittent fasting, and after your intermittent fasting window gets over, whenever you eat something, you're causing an insulin spike. Now, if you choose to eat fat instead of carbs, how that will affect your insulin spike, I don't have any information about that. So personally, I cannot go ahead and recommend this or suggest that it be done, because I'll have to have some data on that. Like, I would not put myself through that because I'm not somebody who engages in fasting. If it's something that you have tried and works for you, sure. I don't haven't found anything which says that it is harmful for you. But again, we'll have to figure out if that's something which will help you achieve your goals in the way that you want.
Oh, that's amazing. So I think I'll give this a shot on my own self and present it as a case study or something on another episode. But before we go, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions regarding your own preferences and your own goals for now. And before I even ask you that, I did not want to use this word, but I think it's high time we talk about it. What are your views on creatine monohydrate?
Right. So the single one molecule or the single substance that I would recommend for anyone to use, and any average human being, any normal individual without any particular goals in mind, the only single thing I would recommend for them to use is creatine.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that. I say the same thing. I'm so happy that you back it up.
Right. If you're using creatine, yes, any creatine monohydrate. That is a form to be using. Why? Why would I recommend creatine? The thing is that it does not just have health benefits. There are other things also that it provides. It is going to bring up energy stores in the muscle, but also it does so in the brain also. Now, in older individuals, it has been found to improve memory and cognition. In people of normal adult age who are sleep deprived, it has been shown to improve cognitive tasks. Those studies are there. Okay, we don't have 100 randomized control trials that we can synthesize into a systematic review, but studies are there which show that there is a beneficial effect, which makes sense because you're improving your brain energy stores, especially at a time when you are sleep deprived, everything is depleted, you have all the toxins accumulated in there, you have to get out. But you improve the energy stores, there's a possibility that your neural pathways improve and you're able to achieve a little bit better cognition and memory. So scientifically it makes sense. Also practically and on studies, it does make sense. Apart from the cognitive benefits, there are very clear-cut benefits for performance, sports performance, and muscle building. So the problem with the obsession with creatine, which has recently come up, is that people assume that they get on creatine and suddenly they'll blow up and they'll suddenly look like I don't want to take any particular bodybuilder names here, but they'll just look like massive trees or something. That does not happen. Creatine is not some magic drug which is going to give you a body which you would not have achieved with a little bit more hard work also. The thing is, it makes it easier for you to get to that level of muscle mass. How creatine works is that it will improve your energy stores over time. Okay, so over a couple of weeks to months, you're going to be able to put more reps in. If you're able to put more reps in, you're going to get that strength and bulk. So that's how that happens. The other thing is it draws in water. Retaining water, that's one way that you're putting on some more weight. That's also why your muscles look bigger, because you're retaining more water. If you wash that water out, a lot of the effect of creatine goes away. But the important thing to remember is that it is improving the energy stores in your body, and over time, it is going to lead to muscle growth. Not as much as you had hoped or expected, but it happens slowly with time. Now, the thing is that with creatine, a lot of people are obsessed with how much are we supposed to be taking. loading phases, and like how we're supposed to take them. Now, creatine, the thing is that it takes some time to build up in your body. You can load it. You can take 20 grams a day for 5 days and then continue at 2 to 3 grams per day. You can also just start off with 2 to 3 grams a day, and in about a month, you're going to achieve the same blood levels as or plasma levels as a person who has loaded would. It would just take you 4 weeks to get to those levels. 2 to 3 grams per day is all that is necessary. More than that is more or less pointless because there is a saturation which happens. Anything extra over 2 to 3 grams per day isn't really going to help you. So it's more or less pointless to get that. The only point of concern which has arisen with creatine is its effect on renal function. There is no effect on renal function. It does not damage your kidney. The only thing is that when you're taking creatine, it gets metabolized, it produces creatinine. That is why your creatinine levels go up. Okay, but that does not mean that your kidneys are not working. Creatine has been given to people with just like a single kidney and deranged renal function, and we found that even in these people, it did not affect renal function. In a few studies, very rarely for people who were taking about 20 grams of creatine per day, it was found that there might be an effect on kidney function. If you're taking a regular dose of 20 grams of creatine per day, then you know what, probably side effects should happen to you. That's all I can say.
Should happen to you. You deserve it. Cool. So, for those who have never tried creatine before, it's something that just increases the availability of inorganic phosphates, which are basically one of the subcomponents of your energy currency, which is ATP, that's adenosine triphosphate. You don't want to get into too much detail about that. And there's a certain amount of water retention that makes your muscles look full. Dr. Chirag, is it okay if I continue taking creatine while I'm on a cut, when I'm trying to get leaner?
You have to just take creatine. It's not something you can stop at any point of time. I mean, obviously you can. It's not going to lead to detrimental effects if you stop it. The thing is that you have to keep taking it, because once you stop taking it, your body washes it out in about 3 to 4 weeks, and then whatever effects were present, they disappear.
Got it. It's actually the most overstudied and misinterpreted supplement in the world of exercise science. So do read more about it. There will be a lot of articles on creatine in the monthly newsletter. Do check it out. I also want to take this moment to speak of Amala Life, our second sponsor on today's episode. And Amala Life is a company that makes 100% vegan protein, and it delivers it in the form of bars. And this is probably the highest protein content I've seen in a bar. Every Amala Life vegan protein bar contains about 25 grams of protein and about 20 grams of carbs. So I think it's a great way to get that protein in, especially if you're a vegetarian or a vegan person. And I cannot emphasize more on some of the really cool pulses that vegans and vegetarians should incorporate in their diets. Lentils, dals, chola or chickpea, all of these guys are great in fiber, and if you kind of combine them as a mixed dal kind of a thing, you're getting a lot of those amino acids anyways. For example, if you do dal and rice, the amino acid profile of rice and dals together tries to kind of compensate for each other's losses. So I just want vegans and vegetarians to not feel that they cannot build muscle. As we just discussed, there's a lot of amazing literature about how vegan protein is in fact beneficial, as Dr. Chirag said. A lot of literature on brain health and vegan protein as well. So we'll cite some of those articles in the newsletter. And like I said, if you want to consider creatine, once again, I would want you to read your own literature, ask your own doctor, and go ahead with the 2 to 3 gram dose, which is maintenance. Or unless you want to like lift really heavy and you want to load and then wait for it to saturate to normal levels. I personally have about 3 to 4 grams daily. I'm sure Dr. Chirag also has been on creatine for a while, and the effects are beautiful. I mean, you will see the effect. It's amazing. Do not overdose on it. everything is good in the right proportion and in the right context. And it is your personal responsibility to understand which category you lie in. You owe it to yourself to do your research. All we can do, people like Dr. Chirag and I, we can just make the sources available in a easier to understand format and hopefully prevent misinformation that goes out there about these things. But it's a personal choice. It's an educational approach. So this podcast is all about education. I don't want to sell anything. I know there's a lot of people trying to sell stuff out there. That's not the point of this podcast. I'm a professor. I'm into academia. I'm a musician. I understand the lack of legit scientific information in the artistic community. This podcast tries to merge both these communities by providing information to the former and music to the latter. Now, before I start playing music, I'm the musical guest, by the way, on today's episode. But before I start playing music, we have to slightly create an inconvenience for Dr. Chirag by asking him some personal questions. So, are you ready?
Not really, but please go ahead. It's okay.
Okay, my first question is, if not a neurosurgeon, what would you be?
Okay, so that genuinely is a very, very difficult question because so far I have, like the only times when I've ever thought about not being a neurosurgeon is when things become really difficult. Like you have had a very difficult day at residency, or you're just like, okay, why am I doing this course? And that is the only time that I've ever thought about why I would not want to be a neurosurgeon. And it's always been like some sort of a anger response or some sort of a frustration which has taken effect. But honestly speaking, I've never seriously given thought to any other career opportunity. At this point of time, I realize that it is possible that I could have easily done something else. There are many different careers that I almost step into regularly. I create tips and videos for fitness, productivity. I have this social media channel, etc., etc. Not really taken up as careers as such, but obviously something I could have considered and taken up a little bit more seriously. But thankfully, neurosurgery happened, and I'm very grateful that it did. And I don't have to really think about what else I could have done. It's always possible that you can dabble in multiple fields. You can branch out and reach into other certain opportunities as well. And hopefully, going forward, there will be a little bit more of that. Let's see.
Awesome. You have to follow Dr. Chirag on his Instagram and his YouTube. I'm going to post all of these links below. He's making some amazing content, especially in small snippets, so that normal, non-scientific people can consume it and apply it in their daily lives. I'm especially a big fan of the recent posts that he's done on the ICMR guidelines, on the proper use of a belt when you're lifting, proper form, proper technique. All the content that you've been putting out has really helped, and we're all really grateful for you for being the kind of person who we can look up to. So many times we see medical practitioners who do not look like they're the brand ambassadors of health, and it's high time we change that. And you're a person who's leading with an example, so we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Chirag. And I, of course, have to ask you, what is your escape from all of this? The trauma, the blood, the surgery, the stress. I'm sure the workout is obviously the biggest escape for you, but is there like an arty escape that you like to indulge in every now and then?
Okay, so honestly speaking, I'm as talentless as they come, so I don't really have any arty escapes. I just I don't know, the usual Netflix and just finding ways to pass time when I come home. So the thing is, when you spend your entire day with difficult scenarios and complicated things, you just want to come home and you just want like a quiet time and like things which you don't have to really put mental effort into paying attention to.
Right. Interesting.
That's what, just like absolute crap and absolute garbage. That's what I like to escape into. That's where I'm at.
I love how you acknowledge the fact that also you, for the audience listening to the firecrackers, I think India just won the match, so you must excuse me for the noise of firecrackers. We're also celebrating the end of an episode, perhaps. But I really love how you acknowledge the fact that sometimes the brain does need to mindfully indulge in, for lack of a better word, dumb shit when you got to do like legendary cognitive stuff for the rest of the day. So I'm super thrilled to see this kind of perspective, you know. So I was going to suggest you some really hardcore TV shows which are like dark and brooding and will make you think. But I think you do enough of thinking all day, so it's just nice for you to go for the slapstick comedy, right?
Yeah.
Right. Before I get into my musical zone, I just wanted to, of course, thank you once again for giving all of this legit information to the medical community as well as the artistic community. And it is my humble plea to indulge in independent art if you find the space for it. There's a lot of musicians in the indie community. Indie is just short for independent music. And there's a lot of musicians who are extremely smart and extremely talented, but they are also, I mean, one of the major drawbacks of being creative is you have very low scores on agreeableness. So when something becomes extremely popular, a creative person might find themselves not wanting to follow the most popular path of least resistance, and then they try to do something that's a little different. And for a person who's conditioned to listen to popular music, it might be a bit of an offset to first listen to it, but I believe we owe it to the musical community to give them a listen, to actually take a little bit more effort to see what they want to say in order to make them feel heard. This is one of the most important motives of the podcast, to support independent music. So I'm going to play some of my own music, but I don't want to sell that. I just want you to know that there's a couple of musicians that I would recommend for you to give it a shot at least, which will be displayed through the 8 episodes of this podcast. So do give it a shot. It would be a lovely way to show some support and help us try to, make a place in this world. And at the same time, your posts on mental health for medical students is something that I really want my medical audience to look up, because he's saying some incredible stuff about what it means to be a doctor in India, how he manages his mental health, and how exercises really helped him cope with all of these things. So please check out Dr. Chirag on Instagram and on YouTube. All the links are below in the description. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, Dr. Chirag, would you just tell me your Instagram handle for the listeners who are not watching it?
Oh, it's very simple. It's Dr.Chirag. So that's as simple as it is.
Dr.Chirag on Instagram. Do check it out. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this so patiently. Thank you so much, Dr. Chirag, for your time. We're moving on to the music section now, but I'll see you around. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, this song is also from the same album, A Textbook of Bad Decisions. I wrote this song when I was on COVID duty, and I possibly had COVID. I had that sore throat. And I was also contemplating on a recent separation, trying to just write through a stream of consciousness about everything that I was going through. And the song is called I'm Fine, and it's just me trying to convince myself that I'm fine when I wasn't. Mentally speaking, as well as respiratory function or physiologically speaking, whatever you want to call it, because I did have a sore throat at the time. Hope you guys like it, and if you like the music, you can just check out Sunit Zadav on Spotify. That's SUNITZADAV on Spotify. This is unreleased stuff, so you're the first people to listen to this, and hopefully it'll be out by next year or maybe the end of this year, after the podcast season 1 is over. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, go. So what if I'm 3 heartbreaks old and my soul's got holes, it's incredibly cold? I'm fine. So what if my decisions are too bold and I haven't invested in any goal? I'm fine.
They say the night is darkest before the dawn. Allow yourself to heal, take time to move on, babe. That's fine by me. Just observe your thoughts as they come and they go, but choose not to react to the highs or the lows, yeah. Just let them be. So here's to a soul fighting all the wars. We'll take your hats off and stand tall and sing. I saw a picture of my ex on Twitter. Now I could be wrong, but she's looking much fitter. I'm fine. Now what if a separation was so bitter? So what if she thinks I'll always be a quitter? I'm fine. Now I got all them honeybees buzzing on Bumble, but a heartbroken man must stay single and humble, yeah, yeah. Sit alone and grieve. Gotta ensure I keep walking, even if I stumble. Eat right and sleep well and keep lifting those dumbbells, baby. And not forget to breathe. So here's to us all fighting all the whiles. We'll take your hats off and stand tall and sing. I said I'm fine. I said I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine. And you will be fine. And you will be fine.
If you like what you hear, please support the Calosm team by liking, sharing, following and/or subscribing to Calosm. That's CALLOSM on Instagram and YouTube. You can also check out all episodes on sunitzadav.com/Calosm. That's sunitzadav.com/CALLOSM. Thank you so much for your time and happy listening.